I'm going to speak about the poetry of Rabbi David Ben Hassin. Rabbi David Ben Hassin is the best-known poet in North Africa. He wrote Hebrew poetry, and he lived in the 18th century. He was born in 1727, and he died in 1792. His poems are piyyutim, that means liturgical poems, and his piyyutim became very popular in not only Morocco, but in all of North Africa, and in fact, they were also popular in the whole of Oriental Jewry. Some of his poems have become part of a Jewish ritual, for instance, for the Brit Milah, circumcision, for the festival of Sukkot, Lulav Uminav, or for the festival of Pesach. Before we start reading the Haggadah, many Moroccans would sing Bibhilu Yatzanu Mimitzrayim, which is part of a poem written by Rabbi David Ben Hassin. The great popularity of the poetry of Rabbi David Ben Hassin means that his poems did represent the outlook and the emotions of his audience. Thus, his depiction of Morocco in his poems, he speaks very often of his own country, his native country, Morocco. And this depiction of Morocco certainly reflects the perception of his contemporaries. They considered him as their spokesman, and it may continue to this day to represent the outlook of many Moroccan Jews. Rabbi David Ben Hassin, like the poetry of other Hebrew poets in North Africa, is essentially centered on religion. In 1712, another Hebrew poet called Rabbi Moshe Aben-Sur stated very clearly that the main objective of an authentic poet is to glorify God, to glorify the Creator. In old Morocco, Hebrew poets were nourished essentially by the Bible, the Talmud, the Kabbalah, rabbinic literature, and Jewish liturgy, the prayers. Their piyyutim were and are still sung today during Jewish festivals, either in a collective meeting of Oriental or Moroccan Jews, or in the synagogues. In fact, to this day, piyyutim constitute part and parcel of the Moroccan Jewish community identity. Some people even consider that piyyutim do constitute part of the definition of the identity of North African Jews. In spite of this religious orientation, Rabbi David's poems are a mine of information not only on the poet's pious past beliefs, but also on his life, the life of his community, of his family, with its joys, its miseries. They also tell us unexpectedly about his deep love of nature. However, readers familiar with his poems cannot escape the unmistakable duality of his poems whenever he speaks of Morocco. Rabbi David Ben Hassin is probably the only Jewish Hebrew poet who composed a few of his lyrical poems in order to express his love of nature, his love for the beauty of his native country, Morocco, especially the beauty of its scenery and natural sites. As a gifted paitan, he was a professional singer of piyyutim, and he was regularly invited by Moroccan Jewish communities in most cities of Morocco. He tells us about his trip to Fez, Marrakesh, Tétouan, El Ksar, and as far as remote villages in Tafilalet in southern Morocco. On one occasion, he even sailed to Gibraltar, where a nascent Moroccan Jewish community in the early 18th century invited him to come and sing his piyyutim. And in Gibraltar, Rabbi David Ben Hassin, who came from Meknes, was amazed to find that Christian musicians were singing by accompanying themselves by written notes in front of them. He had never seen such a thing. On one of his pastoral poems, Asaper Pelaecha, he describes his happiest moments during his trip to Tafilalet by the river Ziz. He thanks God who let him discover, I quote him, the wonders of its luxuriant vegetation, the myriads of palm trees growing by the flowing waters, and he is overwhelmed by emotion before the beauty of the scenes before him. He even goes as far as exclaiming, Ilan hazeh mana'eh, how beautiful is this tree. And thus he becomes oblivious to a famous proclamation of Pirkei Avot that forbids a Jew to deviate from his prayers by looking at the beauty of nature. In another one of his intimate lyrical poems, Shir HaShirim La'el Tamim Deot, a song of songs to omniscient God, he cannot hide his exhilaration and his sheer delight during his journey when he encounters extraordinary landscapes, high mountains, I'm quoting him, overflowing with cascading rivers and torrents, the bubbling springs and sparkling water. A land teeming with gazelles, deer, lions and their cubs, and all kinds of animals. Lechu hazu mifalot dar shamayim. Consider the masterpieces of he who resides in heaven. This poem was written while the poet was sailing to Gibraltar, and facing the ocean for the first time, he is awed by the powerful swelling of the waves in the raging storm, by the howling winds, and by the mystery of a deep sea. Once again, he is overwhelmed by his sense of wonder and his keen emotional response before the grandeur and the immensity of the ocean. Rabbi David Ben Hassin seems to have enjoyed traveling around throughout Morocco, despite, at the time, the difficulties of travel and the endemic insecurity. However, living in the 18th century, Rabbi David Ben Hassin bears witness to the lawlessness and arbitrary conduct of local rulers, the poverty and violence everywhere, and the ill treatment of his fellow Jews. Hence, in many of his poems, his love for his native land does not translate into a similar passion for its population, to say the least. The protagonists of his poems, the notabilities whom he flatters in his eulogies, his colleagues and his friends, his neighbors, the people who consider him as a popular spokesman because he writes about their joys and their suffering, are not his Muslim compatriots, but exclusively members of a Jewish community. Let us remember that Rabbi David Ben Hassin lived during the chaotic and lawless times that followed the death of Mullah Ismail in 1727, and that lasted for 30 days until 1757, when Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah mounted on the throne. But even during the reign of Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah, Jews were still persecuted and oppressed. The end of his life, unfortunately, corresponded with the reign of Mullah Yazid between 1790 and 1792, which was a calamity for the whole of Morocco, and particularly for the Jewish communities whom El Yazid wanted to exterminate, but didn't happen because he died in battle in 1792. So on the whole, the life of Rabbi David Ben Hassin was a time of oppression for his community. In his piyyutim, David Ben Hassin never shows any interest for the life of his Muslim neighbors, nor for their culture. He's a poet. He's never interested in the literature of his Muslim colleagues, of their belief, their poetry. He mentions his non-Jewish population of Morocco only when he describes their hostility towards his community. He refers to Morocco as a foreign country, a paradigm of a galut, the exile where the people of Israel, I quote, yearn to be freed from their subjection to foreign nations. Mit'avim herut mishabud malchiyot. They want to be freed from the subjection of foreign nations. For him, Morocco is a harsh country, ummakasha, where his people live in abject poverty, humiliated, despised, and disgraced. Amcha dal v'nim'as, nehpar v'nivzeh. The poet deems this land too impure to receive the mortal remains of a tzaddik like Rabbi Amram Diwan, who died during his life. Tzaddik tamim ech nikbar be'eretz ha'amim. How could a tzaddik like Rabbi Amram Diwan be buried in such an impure land? Here he writes, Jews are powerless captives, ill-treated and enslaved by cruel enemies who victimize, exploit, pillage, and abuse them or murder them at will. They are like sheep hounded by a pack of 70 wolves. Pedemi oivim tzon ben shivim zeevim, kama gadol koha shel kisva benehem hona, he asks. In 1783, the poet composes an elegy on the slaughter of 7 Jewish hawkers, butchered, he says, like cattle. He similarly laments the murder of one of the community leaders, Rabbi Moshe ben Maman, and that of an innocent man, a righteous young man, he says. He implores God, come to my rescue. My enemies beat me, wounded me, they made me drink a full cup of poison. Rabbi David Ben Hassin is particularly affected by the sacking of the Melach of Meknes in 1790 in a famous poem called El Avre Derech Kre'a, to you, passers-by, I'm calling out. And he describes his persecutions in a long elegy. I quote just a few of his verse. The governor let the looters do as they pleased. Nothing escaped their cupidity. Day and night they plundered and devoured Israel. They desecrated the Torah of Moses. Mothers were trampled with their children. Torah scrolls were strewn on the ground with our holy books. They beat us to death, mercilessly, cruelly. The leaders of our community in Ayers were put to shame and thrown in prison. I mourn the destruction of the writings of our sages, an invaluable loss. The Sultan, Moulay Yazid, hanged several of our leaders, such a cruel death. In all the cities of Morocco, Jews were in such distress that some of them, he says, converted to Islam. Others died as martyrs. In Fez, the rioters dug out the dead in the cemetery. When Rabbi David Ben Hassin implores God to deliver him from slavery, so that I may return, he says, to my country, my native land, he explains, this native land is not Morocco. His native land is the city of Zion, the promised land, where the people of Israel will return in messianic times. Returning from one of his travels to what he calls Mechoni, Mechos Hefzi Ve'artzi, my home, my country, he makes it clear that my home and my country does not mean Morocco at all, not even the city of Meknes, where he was born and where he lives, but only its Jewish quarter, the Melah. In his famous Ohil Yom Yom Eshta'eh, he fervently yearns to go and see the Holy Land of Tveria. And he prays for the return of the children of Israel to their frontiers. Vayashuvu vanim gvulam. In his despair, Rabbi David realizes that there is no escape. In several piyyutim, he uses the metaphor of Morocco as a prison for the tormented Jews. Bet kele uma'asar, he calls it. God, your son is a captive in distress, dying, broken, in chains. Nilcha b'shevi, nich'e, umet, o nishbar, nishba. Embittered by the intolerable persecution and the degradation of his people, he calls upon God to explain his apparent apathy. And he says, Kadosh Shma Tza'akat Bnei Israel, listen to the cry of the children of Israel. Hopeless and angry, he even appeals to God to avenge his people. The depressing picture of the suffering of Moroccan Jews in the piyyutim of Rabbi David Ben Hassin constitute an additional source for the study of the relations between Muslims and Jews in the Maghreb up to the beginning of the 20th century. It confirms countless eyewitness descriptions and documentation left by travelers, diplomats, chronicles, and historians, as well as recent scholarly publications on Jewish history and literature in North Africa. I can quote only the works by Professor Yosef Shitrit, by Professor Paul Fenton, and by most specialists of Moroccan Jewry in the United States, Canada, Israel, and France. I conclude that as a sensitive poet of talent, Rabbi David Ben Hassin glorified the beauty of his country in his piyyutim. With an equal emotional charge, he also painted a poignant picture of the tragic condition of Moroccan Jews agonizing under the yoke of tyranny and persecution. Fortunately, these evil times are now gone, but so is the ancient Moroccan Jewish community that chose to leave its native land in the second part of the 20th century after nearly 2,000 years of existence. The multitude of Jewish tourists of Moroccan origin who are now flocking back to Morocco for nostalgic visits may be somewhat reminiscent of a divided frame of mind of our great poet. They are certainly in love with Morocco's sunny beaches and welcoming resorts, but their past history also led them to abandon their country en masse as soon as they were able to do so. The historical memories engraved in their collective consciousness and so powerfully evoked in Rabbi David's poems certainly played a decisive role in the advent of this mass migration, while all of us can only applaud to the openness of present-day Morocco. This historical reality cannot be negated and should not be concealed nor distorted. In this regard, the rehabilitation of the role of Maghreb Jewry in recent historical research and publications in Moroccan universities is a very positive sign of inclusiveness, which could and should lead to a recognition of poets like Rabbi David Ben Hassin, as well as other great Jewish men of letters from the past, to be considered as an integral part of Moroccan cultural and historic heritage. Thank you.
Thank you.